Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, and in this video we talk about systems. Yes, systems. We haven't really spoken a great deal about systems on this channel, and well, that's mainly because I tend to find that audiences, you people, enjoy me speaking about lore, meta plots, I guess, game ideas and recaps a lot more than you enjoy my talking about the so-called crunch of gaming. But I was asked by one of The World Below's backers, someone who picked up a physical copy of The World Below, for me to describe my favourite gaming system. Now, I don't have an easy answer for that, because I would suggest that I have different favourites for different aspects of gaming. As a game designer, my favourite system is StoryPath Ultra, and the reason for that, well, in fact, there's a few reasons for that. One is it's the system I have been working with most frequently, most recently at that. It's the system that is used in At the Gates, which I wrote on, The World Below, which I developed and co-authored, and Curseborn, which I have co-authored to a significant degree. It's also included, and they came from the RPG Anthology. So I've had a lot of experience of StoryPath Ultra, and while I did not create it by any means, Danielle Lauzon and Eddie Webb deserve the largest part of the credit for that. I have certainly played around with it a lot, and I developed the first game that utilized it. So I've played around and I understand it pretty damn well at this point, and I've added bits and pieces, taken bits and pieces away depending on the game I've worked on. Now, you might be wondering, what is StoryPath Ultra? Some people won't be aware of it, and right now you may have heard that there is a BackerKit campaign going on, so this video is timely, for the StoryPath Ultra core manual. So the core manual is like a sort of Fate-style rulebook, or Mithras, or basic role-playing rulebook that presents the system in its totality. It provides you with various expansions, so that if you want your game to be more investigative, you can take this expansion. If you want it to be more about like vehicular combat, Mad Max style, you've got this expansion as well. It provides 3 different games within the core manual that shows you different ways of using StoryPath Ultra, as well as character creation rules, and so on and so forth. It's a great piece of work by my friend and colleague Eddie Webb, and I've linked it below because I think as of time that this video goes up, you're only going to have about 48 hours, maybe even less, to back it. But if you're in the market for a new system, if you're interested in the things I'm about to talk about, I recommend checking it out. Plus, as I mentioned, it's the system that appears in Curseborn and various other games. So what is StoryPath Ultra? Well, at its most basic, if you know World of Darkness, if you know Chronicles of Darkness, you know Storyteller and storytelling. StoryPath is an evolution, a tangent, if you like, from that kind of system, because it's D10 dice pools, just like those games. 8s, 9s, and 10s are your hits. 8s and 9s are 1 hit each. 10s count as 2 hits. So it's your skill plus your attributes. You have a value and a skill, value and an attribute. However much the total is, that's how many d10s you roll. You roll them, you look for your 8s, 9s, and 10s, and that then determines how well you succeed. Now, you may be thinking, that all sounds very familiar, and indeed, going all the way back to Shadowrun, which is where the dice pool mechanics started, I want to say, obviously with D6s in role-playing, and that's where Storyteller took its idea but changed it to D10s. You may be thinking, well, what's so different about StoryPath Ultra when compared to those? And for me, as a game designer and as a story guide of GM, the biggest difference is that every single hit you roll means something. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, to take Chronicles of Darkness as an example, if I were to roll a pool of 10 dice, because it's something I'm really good at, and I got 4 successes, so I got 4 8s and 9s, let's say, and that results in me beating the difficulty threshold. I only need to get 1 8 or 9 to win in this case. What am I doing with the other successes there? Well, in Chronicles of Darkness, nothing. Because between 1 success and 5 successes, which is your exceptional success, the additional successes don't actually translate to anything. And the same applies for World of Darkness too, with Storyteller. The difference or distinction between a success and a critical success often means a lot of dice that aren't actually working for you. Whereas Storypath Ultra, every single hit can be used to buy something. It effectively means every die you roll has a narrative effect, and I very much like that from a GM perspective, story guide perspective, and from a design perspective. I'll give you an example. If, let's say, I am fighting a solitary goblin, someone with only a defense of 1, well, I will roll my close combat plus might. Let's say with my close combat plus might, I have 6 dice and I roll 3 hits. Well, with the first hit, against its defense of 1, I have nullified it and I've scored a hit. Let's say I translate that hit into an injury. So I do a damage. I bop the goblin on the head. I still have 2 hits left. Now, in Storypath Ultra's various books, you have lists of tricks that you can buy using those hits. So these could be things like disarming an opponent, grappling an opponent, tripping an opponent, sundering their armor, that kind of thing. So every single hit can be used for something. It means you can basically achieve multiple things with one action. You're not just constantly shaving hit points off the enemy and in turn they are doing it to you, because enemies can buy tricks too. I really love this as a mechanic. I love the idea that every die actually means something. It's something the Storypath Ultra core manual gives you lots of options on, and of course we explore lots of options in Curseborn and the other Storypath Ultra games too. But it comes into its own even further when you look at complications. So this is the other part of Storypath Ultra I really, really enjoy. And complications, at first glance, just seem like additional difficulty on a roll, and that isn't what they are. The example I like to give is, and I've given it before on this channel, so do forgive me, I should really come up with a new one, but I think this is a perfect example. So you're running down an alleyway, there's a chain link fence, there's razor wire along the top, you're being chased by a werewolf, so you have reason to flee here. Now, you want to climb over the chain link fence and drop to the other side and keep running. To do that, you need to succeed on an athletics plus might roll. That's what I'm going to say your dice pool is, although you may well justify using dexterity instead. Now, let's say you make that roll. Well, as the story guide, I'm going to say there's a complication as well. It's only a minor complication. It's a complication of 1. You've got minor, moderate, and major. This is a minor complication. It's that razor wire along the top. And the story guide might say, if you don't also buy off the complication, then you will suffer an injury, let's say. You'll get to the other side, but you'll scratch yourself. You'll cut yourself open on the razor wire. Or they might say, your pocket gets torn open and your wallet falls out. So the werewolf may not catch you, but they will have your ID. So in that example, let's say I'm rolling 6 dice to climb over the fence. I get 1 hit. Well, congratulations. I beat the difficulty. Bonk. That's gone. I can climb over, but I don't buy off the complication. So that means I take this injury or I lose my wallet, depending on what the story guide decided. I love the idea of complications. They are one of my favourite things to throw into games now because they don't stop success, they only add narrative heft to your actions. They're not supposed to be debilitating, they are supposed to introduce new complications, new aspects to a story, which make things quite narratively fun. And on the other side of that, you have your enhancements. Enhancements are automatic hits, but they only apply if you roll a hit. To give you an example, let's say I am a rifleman on a rooftop. I am aiming at someone who will remain nameless, and I take my shot. Well, right now it's just ranged combat plus dexterity to make my hit. Let's say I make my hit. I do an injury to my target. Good for me. Now, I could have got more hits if I had enhancements beforehand. What are enhancements? Well, they are things like adding a scope to the rifle, adding a laser sight to the rifle, arming my rifle with armor-piercing rounds, let's say. whatever the case, these enhancements, let's say now I have the scope on my rifle, so I have a +1 enhancement. What does that mean? Well, let's say I roll to hit. I have 7 dice. I roll 2 hits. Okay, so I roll 2 hits. Well, because I have a scope, that gave me an enhancement. So now I have 3 hits. I can use one of those hits to hit the person I'm trying to hit, but I can use those additional hits to, as mentioned before, buy certain tricks, including the critical trick, which does additional injuries. So you get the point there, I hope. Anyway, I'm not going to go fully into the StoryPath Ultra breakdown because the book is available, and I'm thinking it may be a good idea at some point to do lots of short snippets of how StoryPath Ultra works for anyone who wants to get into that system. But this is one of the reasons I very much like the StoryPath Ultra system. It works for me very, very well as a writer as well as a story guide. Now, as a GM, there's another system I'm a big fan of, and that is the basic role-playing system. Now, this is completely different, really, to the StoryPath Ultra system. This is a percentile die system. It's the one that's used in Call of Cthulhu. It's not quite what's used in Eclipse Phase, but it's very close, and I enjoy it in both of those games. The percentile die system tends to work, not always, but tends to work along these lines. You have a skill that ranges from 0 or 1 to 100. It's either 0 to 99 or 1 to 100, depending on the system you're using. And let's say you have a skill rating of 50. Well, you have to roll 50 or lower on a D100 to succeed at the skill. Simple as that. As your character gets more proficient in things, your skill rating goes up, therefore your margin for success goes up. Now, this does leave a lot of room for failure, because when you're building characters, usually they'll only have a few skills that are above 50%, which means you are reliant on, well, basically using the right equipment to make your rolls easier. You get a +10 or +20 to your skill in this case, or if the GM, the keeper in a game of Call of Cthulhu, is feeling particularly harsh, they will say, for example, nope, you've got to roll a hard roll, which is half of your skill, or an extreme roll, that's a fifth of your skill. And that can get quite tricky. Why do I like this system so much? Because it is so simple in setup. Well, my main reason for enjoyment of it is because players get it. They understand it almost right away. I need to roll under or over this number. No adding required. Yes, you may sometimes need to do a 1 division to see what half of a skill is or a fifth of a skill is, but as a basis, I think it's very simple. It can be quite swingy, of course, because you're either succeeding or failing based on a 100 die roll, but I like the idea that you can have, let's say, a character who's trying to make their library use roll, because it's Call of Cthulhu. They're delving around in an old archive, and typically if they've got a library use of, let's say, 60, they have a 60% chance of success. They need to roll 60 or lower. Now, let's say this library has been overturned. There's been a fight. Or no, let's say it's riddled with damp. Pages are stuck together. There's mold creeping through lots of the books. The floorboards are likely to collapse from rot at any given time. Well, in that case, it's going to be a hard library use roll. So now, instead of rolling 60 or under, you're trying to roll 30 or under. You get my point? I quite like that. Eclipse Phase mixes it up a little more by having things like if you're rolling a double digit, so let's say we again have a skill rating of 60 and something, if you roll a 33, a 44 or a 55, those are really good results for you. That can result in all kinds of spectacular successes. But conversely, if you roll a 66, a 77, an 88 or a 99, those will be very bad for you. And that's a nice way of playing around with what is ultimately a very simple system to make it more intuitive, or not necessarily intuitive, make it more engaging, and hopefully you will find it intuitive. So I put basic roleplay up there as well, because it isn't in the same camp as StoryPath Ultra. It's a very different kind of system, but it's one I find people just understand very, very easily. Now, I wanted to give a little bit of focus, just a little bit of focus, to another system that I'm a fan of. I mentioned it in one of my recent videos, actually, just offhand. It's the One Roll engine that appears in Godlike, it appears in Wild Talents. And this is, again, D10s, but this time when you roll your pool, you're looking for matches. You have successes determined by the width of your results and the height of your results. So once again, we're adding one trait to another, and we're rolling that many dice. Now, the example that is often used in a game of Godlike is, let's say, how well you shoot someone. So, for example, if I roll 3 4s, then that is going to basically, the higher the number tends to mean the more significant the body part I am hitting. So a 4, I think, is a leg, I want to say. And the 3 is how well I hit it. Now, conversely, if I only roll 1 10, well, that doesn't mean anything because you've always got to get a match. If I get 2 10s, however, that is 2 hits to the head. And that is probably a better roll to get than 3 4s, because if I want to take out the enemy, I want to hit them in the head. I don't want to blow their leg off, ideally. But again, it depends on what you like. Now, I've met some people who love One Roll engine, some people who hate it. I think it takes a while to wrap your head around the idea of looking for matches and whether you want to aim high or if you want to aim wide. So the wide is the number of successes you get. The height is the number that is getting successes over and over again. So I appreciate that that isn't a system for everyone. But again, I feel it perfectly matches the games that it has been designed for, and that isn't always the case. You know, sometimes, especially with D&D as an example, and I do enjoy D&D, don't get me wrong, but I find that people try to retrofit the 5th edition rule set to every single kind of game, every single kind of setting, and I get it. It's a marketing thing. You know, people are going to buy it because most people play D&D, but sometimes it is, you know, making a pig's ear out of something that you don't really need to. One of my favourite sci-fi series is Farscape, and I've got the Farscape RPG up there. There's a D20 version of it. It is basically 3rd edition D&D, not even 3.5, 3rd edition D&D reskinned with Farscape, and there was so much that going on during the D20 boom in the early 2000s. And you'd find all of these properties that were D20fied, and that didn't necessarily improve them. So I like that One Roll engine has not proliferated widely because it has a very specific task in mind. It basically makes certain outcomes more likely. So let's say it's easier to shoot someone in the torso because there's more numbers, more hard numbers, or high numbers in the torso. I want to say 6, 7, and 8, maybe even 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all torso hits. So you're always more likely to hit someone's centre mass. And 10, of course, is the rarest because it's the head. But I think that it wouldn't work, conversely, in other games, and games that are more narratively driven, like the Storypath Ultra ones I was talking about earlier. So, yeah, my 3 favourite systems are Storypath Ultra, because I love the narrative heft of the dice roll. Basic role-playing, because I think that it is immediately understandable to a role player. And One Roll engine, because it tends to be quite lethal, which means it is eminently suited for the games to which it has been applied. But that doesn't have to be for everyone. It's just something that suits me. I'd love to hear from you which systems you enjoy, especially any indie systems. I know a lot of people love the 10 Candles system. Some people still love Dread, the idea of playing a horror game with the Jenga tower. There are interesting systems that have been applied to games like Bluebeard's Bride. Hell, I mean, you could look at a system of the original indie game, if you like, Fiasco, and say that's an excellent system. But ultimately, I would love to hear your thoughts on which systems you get on with best and which systems you don't get on with. What don't you like? That's always an interesting discussion point. As always, I'll reply to your comments, and as always, do check out Curseborn. The link is below. It will be using the StoryPath Ultra system, and check out the StoryPath Ultra backer kit before it ends in about a day. Thank you very much for watching.